I got one of the most highly commented videos that I'm going to talk to you about, and it's about whether you as a buyer, would you sign an agreement to have a real estate agent represent you? Now, I'm going to show this in two different angles because I've actually put it out there for consumers to answer, and I actually put it out there for realtors to answer as well. And it's interesting to hear both perspectives, and I'm going to share with you some of the things you need to be thinking about before you make that decision. All right, so on the buy side, we have buyers who will not sign an agreement to have a realtor represent them through a transaction. And I would say about 90 to 95% of people who commented on my TikTok file on the video that I put out there actually said they would just do it themselves, or they would go directly with the listing agent. And honestly, there could be some good to that, and there also could be some bad to that. I think it really just kind of depends on who you are and what your experience level is. And then on the flip side, we got a Facebook post that I put out there in a real estate Facebook group page. And I asked realtors what you would do if a consumer came into your open house who did not want representation from a buyer. How would they handle that? And that can get a little sensitive in terms of how someone wants to approach their business. There is no right or wrong, but I want to show you in this video today some of the things that you need to prepare for, especially if you live in the state of Florida. I'm here in the Tampa Bay area, and the reason why the state is important to take into account is because the laws can be different from state to state. So you want to make sure that you understand exactly what the laws are, so that you can decide exactly what you want to do. But for my Florida folks, this one's for you. As of the beginning of August, new laws came in place from the NAR settlement. And here what the changes are to just kind of recap everything. A real estate agent can no longer show a house to a buyer without some form of written agreement. And this is very different for a lot of real estate agents. And it's actually really different for a lot of buyers, because they never had to sign one before. And in that agreement, it's basically saying that, hey, if I show you this house, I'm going to get compensated for it, right? And the compensation part of that conversation can get a little, confusing. And a lot of it really kind of depends on how the realtor decides if they want to get compensated or not. And it has a lot to do with communication with that buyer. So very first thing is that the seller who's actually selling you the house as a buyer will pay your buyer's agent a commission, and that's it. You don't have to worry about it. Option B is you as a buyer will have to pay the commission of the buyer's agent. Or number three, if for some reason the seller is paying some part of the commission to the buyer's agent, you as the buyer might be on the hook for paying the difference. And a lot of it depends on the communication you had with the agent that is representing you for that particular property. As you can see, things can get a little sensitive there. Most people will say, whoa, wait a second, right? My realtor didn't do anything for me. They never provided me any value, right? And it's possible that that was the case. And it's actually not surprising. As a real estate agent myself here in the Tampa Bay area, it's actually not surprising to hear that, right? So I totally get it from a consumer side. Now, let me show you some of these forms so that you kind of understand what it looks like and what to expect, because a buyer can come to an agent in different types of journeys. Some people go on Zillow.com and look for properties. They find a house that they want to see, and then the buyer's agent shows them the house, right? But there's no real relationship there. Now, there are the times that a buyer might come through, let's say, a referral through somebody, and then find their agent and then develop some rapport with that person there. And then there could be another agreement that's used for that. So I'm going to show you real quick by sharing my screen exactly what these documents look like. We're not going to go line by line through each one of them, but if you do have questions, make sure you message below because I can definitely answer them for you. I'm going to get into just the very important parts of it. Okay, so let's get into this here right now. All right, what you're seeing on the screen is the actual document of different documents that we have here. The very first one that I'm actually going to run through is what we call the property pre-touring agreement. Now, if you notice on the property pre-touring agreement, it's going to have the agent's name, the consumer's name, and then there's going to be a part where it talks about broker's compensation, And here in bold, it says broker's compensation from any source will not exceed the compensation that's written in this agreement with you. So for example, if the person put 2% as a compensation for them to get paid, should they represent you on a particular property, then what would happen there is that the seller would be paying the agent 2%. And if they're not, let's say they said they were paying for 3%, that agent that's representing you cannot collect 3%. They still have to collect 2%. So a lot of the stuff can be negotiable, but this is what the property pre-tool agreement looks like. And it's very normal for someone that is maybe looking on Zillow and wants to see a house with an agent. This is probably the agreement you're going to see a majority of the time. Okay. So be prepared with this. These are questions you may have on this, and I just want you to make sure you're comfortable understanding what this looks like. But let's get into the other one here. The other one is what we call a buyer's broker's agreement. There's different versions that we use in Florida. The one that's most typically used is what we call a transaction broker buyer agreement. You got the parties' names, you got the term of the contract, what type of property it is. It's going to show you what the broker's obligations is to you and the consumer obligations, right? So if you look at this one, this is more designed for maybe someone that is really wanting to get more into an exclusive relationship with the realtor, because they just feel like that realtor has a lot of value to provide them aside from just opening the door. Okay. So this is pretty typical for someone who wants to be exclusive with an agent until they feel that maybe that person's not necessarily servicing them. And then at that point, that contract can be canceled. Sometimes there could be repercussions on it financially, and sometimes there isn't. It just really depends on what's written on the contract and also what's talked upon between the buyer and the actual buyer's agent. Okay. So let's take a quick peek to show you exactly what this looks like. Again, we went through the first part here. And then if you notice here in the compensation part, this is where they start being specific as to what that realtor wants to get compensated for and what they expect. Okay. Same thing happens with the mentality of understanding exactly if that seller is not providing that specific percentage that's written on that agreement, what is that realtor going to do? Is that realtor going to be a person that says to you, hey, you're paying the difference? If the seller's not paying, are you going to be on the hook for paying it, right? So as you see, things can get a little muddy there. Now, again, as I mentioned before in the beginning of the video, most people don't actually want to sign any of these agreements. Most of them said that they'd rather go directly to the listing agent, right? This is the agent that represents the seller. Now, a majority of the time, what I saw on the comments is that most people just kind of want to negotiate by themselves because they feel like the real estate agent who maybe helped them in the past really didn't do anything to begin with. They never really deserved to earn any of the commission. Then there's a few others that said, hey, you know what? I have a little bit of experience. I can negotiate by myself, right? So now you got to look at those situations and say, okay, if you have experience, that can be super good for you, right? You could probably hold your own in negotiations with an agent that represents the seller. But if you're someone that goes and talks to the seller directly, you have to now figure out exactly if you're going to go in there wanting that agent to help you, or are you just going to go in there and be unrepresented and just negotiate on your behalf? And what I saw here is that on the Facebook group page that I made, where I made some comments to realtors, some of them, first of all, didn't get specific into how they would approach that. Some still don't know what they're going to do. And then there's some others that have a little bit more clarity about how they would approach it. And this is something as a buyer that you should be aware of. So there's some people that will say, hey, I'm still going to represent my seller. I'm not going to represent the buyer and help them negotiate. However, I will help them with administrative things like writing the offer and things of that nature and just kind of walking them through the process, right? So at that point, this person is really just kind of servicing you, but not to the fullest degree. And that might be okay for most people. And all honesty, that's kind of what it looks like when a buyer goes straight to a builder without any realtor representation, right? Because that sales rep that helps the builder, their fiduciary duties is to that builder, but they're going to still put a smile on their face and help you with paperwork and help you apply for a mortgage, right? but you're never really going to know what you could have got away with in negotiations or not. So you as a buyer or as a consumer have to kind of decide if that is the right thing for you. However, there's going to be some other people who want to be represented, right? And then you have to figure out exactly if you have that agent who represents the seller help you. Now that agent who is in the state of Florida can represent both parties as a transaction broker. And what this basically means is that this person is basically helping both parties come into an agreement through the whole process. And you have to think at that point, what is that agent's moral obligations in terms of things that can happen? Like the initial negotiating of setting an offer for a price or asking for closing costs or asking for repairs, or what happens if there's a low appraisal and you don't want to spend money, right? How will that happen in terms of trying to find some middle agreement, some common ground between seller and buyer, and what is their realtor's role going to be in that? Are they going to be truly representing you or not? And so these are little things that you have to think about if you make that decision to have that agent that represents the seller also help you as well. A lot of things here to think about. If you walk into an open house, the agent that is representing the seller is not going to force you to sign an agreement, or at least they shouldn't force you to sign an agreement because they are servicing the seller. But in the moment that you want to actually make an offer on the property, at that point, there could be an agreement that happens that has to take place, because now they're going to act in the role of assisting both the seller and the buyer. So with that said, these are important topics that I wanted you to learn about. Again, make sure that you look at your own state laws to figure out exactly what that is. And if you don't know what they are, feel free to message me or just put a comment below, and I can actually get someone from your state to answer that question for you, because I do have connections in all 50 states. Hopefully this video helped. Make sure you check out some of the rest of them that I have here at the end of the screen.